Hello, I'm Beatriz Pont from the OECD Directorate for Education, and I truly wish I could be here with you today, but unfortunately it was not possible, so we've done the second best thing to being there, which is a video conference. I'm gonna give you a summary of the work that we at OECD did for Norway, which is now in your hands, which is the reform on lower secondary education in Norway. And the presentation that I'll give you has 3 stages. The first one is what we did and why. The second one is the actual recommendations. And the third is the OECD Seminar for Leaders in Education Improvement. The first is Norway had a reform and is actually in the process of doing a lower secondary education reform in which they found a number of issues, especially student motivation and teaching quality, where the results of lower secondary education were not delivering as good a result as Norway expected or wanted. So they approached the OECD to help them look at what other countries are doing to get the appropriate set of recommendations from the OECD, and for us to work with Norway in getting together, discussing, and coming up with recommendations that are feasible, viable, and of good quality, and implementable in the context of Norway. So this is how we embarked in the OECD Norway review of lower secondary education. Kirsti Klette, who is with you and who's the organizer of this event, was the one who, a Norwegian member of our steering group, of a group of international experts who contributed to this review. And the basic premise of this review was rather PISA results and student performance in Norway as measured by your own tests of student performance. What we know is that Norway is a high performer among OECD countries. It's 9th in line with the rest of OECD high performers, but Norway could be better. And we know that given the investment, given the importance that education has in Norway, it could be much better. At the same time, Norway has good quality and good equity in their education system. So more or less, any student, depending, it doesn't matter what school the student chooses to go, they will get the same high quality education. So this is quite important, and it's something that we at OECD value extremely. We think that it's very important that education systems have high quality, but that they also combine high equity. So this is one of the strengths that we at OECD think Norway has in its education system. In our analysis, we came up with a set of 5 strengths and also 5 weaknesses that I want to raise with you today that were the premise of our review. The first strength is that student performance is in the path to improvement. In Norway, as I said, you're 9th, and from 2006-2009 you've improved quite a lot in some PISA results. The second is that education is quite a priority in Norway. In many countries, actually, this is not the case. And in Norway, throughout different governments, in the local governance, among the different policy areas, education always comes up as a very important priority in which there is consensus across society. The third is that you have a comprehensive system, and that is that all students learn together in the school up to the age of around 15 or 16, and this is something in which we see that combines high quality and high equity especially. The fourth is something that we found looking at PISA data, looking at this pupil survey data. There's a great environment between teachers and students in schools in Norway. And what you see is that they all get along great. They're friends, they like the environment in school, and that's very positive to build on for better improvement. And the fifth is that there is a policy commitment to education improvement in Norway. And that is something we've seen, we value very much, because Norway is always investing in looking to develop policies that will improve education in Norway. Now, all these strengths also bring about some challenges. And we've seen that out of the same strengths also come situations that can be improved. The first is that student learning is not being addressed properly. Students, as I said, teachers and students get along very well, but in terms of the learning that happens in the classroom, that is not so clear. And this is something that I'll show you, or I'll tell you later, that you may want to look into the PISA data to see. The second is that adolescents are not fully engaged in their learning process in schools. And this is something that doesn't happen only in Norway. It happens actually in many OECD countries, and we have evidence that this 13, 14, 15 is when students actually become really bored with school. They want something else. And it's actually when we visited many schools and met with teachers, met with students, what we found is that they're all thinking about hormones, actually. Nothing else, no school, but rather something different. So schools really need to attract their students to focus on learning. And the fourth is that there is an imbalanced situation between the way you design policy and the way it's implemented. You have a governance structure that is very decentralized, and this is very positive, but at the same time your policy design is not in consonance with this, with the way that your governance is structured. So your policy is not very clearly designed for this suitable structure. And I forgot one, which is the teachers. Teacher quality in Norway has a lot of space for improvement. So out of these four challenges, student learning, adolescence, and teaching and learning and governance, I'm going to give you some data that you could look into the PISA, and I will send you a PowerPoint that you may want to look into. On the one hand, we look at the PISA data, and there's a question for students where they say, well, how do you feel about the way teachers teach to you? And there's one question that says, teachers help students relate their stories to their everyday lives, or teachers really focus on the individual students, and an average of students really rank that question very low. So they feel that they're great colleagues, they're friends, they're working together, but they're not really focusing on the students themselves and the learning process so well as they could. And actually, if you ask teachers themselves, teachers say that they feel they're having a lot of impact on their students. So there is a big gap between what students think and what teachers think. And that is something that every time that I've presented this in Norway, it's something that's quite telling of the story. There's something that's not happening in the classrooms, that if it was to happen, it would really unleash learning by Norwegian students to go up to a top performer. At the same time, we see that teachers' salaries are quite low in comparison with other countries, in comparison with salaries within Norway itself. And that is something that is contributing to not attract the best quality teachers that could be teaching, among some other factors. It's not only salaries. And yet another data that we see is that Norwegian teachers actually do not take as much training as in other countries. And that is the Thales data shows that Norwegian teachers take much less training than any other teachers in the Thales survey, and also don't feel that they need any more. So this is something that could be looked into as part of a strengthening teacher quality. And then the last issue, we see that governance is a difficult challenge in Norway. Norway has a very decentralized structure, as I'm sure you know. I'm not telling you anything new, but there's a high degree of decisions that are made at the local level. A lot. It's one of the highest countries together with Finland, Hungary, and Scotland, and that's only increased in recent years. So, and what we see is that the way policy is designed does not take into account this very highly decentralized structure. So out of these analysis that we've done, which is not only data or research, but actually we went to Norway, we visited Norway with our group of experts, which is with a group, 2 people from OECD, and then 3 people, Kirsty Klette, of course, and Nancy Hoffman, and Dennis Shirley, and Diana Toledo and myself, we traveled to Norway. We interviewed key people. We visited schools, we visited the ministry. We had a consultative seminar together with some of you actually, and to discuss our preliminary findings. And we came up with a set of 4 key recommendations for Norway. And these recommendations are, some of them, they're in your policy already, but we think it's important for the OECD to confirm these. The first is that you need to work on teachers and teacher quality and teaching quality. And that is the need to raise the status of teachers and teaching, and to improve the quality of teaching by designing better standards of what a good teacher should look like. So there's a clear knowledge of what a good teacher should look like all across Norway. That there should be better training for teachers at the school level and potentially at the national level. What we think it's important, and we discussed internally whether there should be a master's program for teachers, that they should raise the minimum requirements to become a teacher in Norway, and there was agreement among all the experts that it should go up to a master's level. And I know that this has been in the discussions in Norway with you in recent years. And the third is to strengthen the incentives for people to become teachers and to stay as teachers in the education system, and that is through the salaries. The second set of recommendations is about school effectiveness. It's about schools. What's happening in schools is not very easy to know because they're very decentralized. Each municipality has their own structure, their own schools, and there's not a clear national knowledge of what's happening in schools. So we think it's important to consolidate the knowledge of schools to the capacity to meet their learning requirements of lower secondary students. And that is the need also to give a certain degree of flexibility for students to choose what they want so that they feel a bit more attracted to schools, and to design the school environment so that it meets the needs of their students. The third is student pathways. And what we saw is that throughout their career as a student, they enter into early childhood, primary, then from primary into secondary, they move. But in primary, they don't have grades. And all of a sudden in secondary, they get grades. And students are quite shocked when they see that they're average or below average. All of a sudden, they have a C or they have a D, and they don't understand. Because when they were in primary, nobody explained to them, how they were performing in relation to the rest, or there was no clear formative assessment or summative assessment that they could know how they were performing. So the transition into lower secondary could be a bit of a shock, and what we recommend is not that you introduce grades in primary, but you start teaching students to understand where they're positioned in the class and how they're progressing themselves to be self-learners and to know where their gaps and their progress is. The other one is to smooth the transition from lower into upper secondary, and that is a governance situation because their schools are in lower secondary, they belong to municipalities, but in upper secondary, they belong to the counties. And therefore, this makes a difference in who owns it and the configuration of the curriculum, which leads to difficulties in the transition up to upper secondary. So we think it's important to develop vertical pathways from lower into upper secondary. And the fourth is to align the different levels of governance to ensure effective policy implementation. This is to design clearly policies so that it is the local level who can respond. There's enough data, there's enough alignment in the system, and all the actors are working together with a clear knowledge of what they need to be doing. So these are the 4 recommendations. And for this purpose, we designed the OECD Seminar for Leaders in Education Reform. This seminar was tailored to Norway because we were looking to take a group of very high-level policymakers in Norway to a best practice education system that had similar challenges to Norway and had solved them in a way that could be interesting for Norway. So in June, we took a group of 30 key stakeholders to Ontario, Canada. And this included the minister herself, the head of KU, the head of the municipality association, of the trade unions. We had some principals. We have representatives from the county officials body. We had teachers. We had a very good cross-cut of representatives from the different actors involved in education policy making, who actually don't meet often together and who don't have the chance to discuss these issues in a closed environment by looking at somebody else. So for a whole week, we worked together. We visited Ontario. We visited some very impressive schools. We also met and had class from very high-level Harvard academics and professors such as Richard Elmore, and we also had Ben Levin and Ken Leetwood. And out of this whole week, the result was an action plan on lower secondary education policies in Norway. This is now in your hands. This is your document that spells out the consensus, more or less, that was reached in Norway out of this analysis and study, using the OECD recommendations as the base for the future policy design. So this is the presentation now. I hope that we have the book that Kirsty can make available to you, and you can have the PowerPoints that I've more or less talked to, that I'll give to Kirsty as well. And if you have any questions, I can't respond now, but I will be very happy to respond to you via email or any other way, by telephone as well, or if you would like to have a Skype conference at some point, I'll be very happy to discuss with you. And I really urge you to move forward with this reform so that you can improve the quality of lower secondary education in Norway. Thank you very much.